Okay. Hello and welcome to this afternoon's event, Shaping Concordia's Future, where we will hear about the recommendations from future Concordia's working groups. We are streaming live from Concordia University's fourth space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. As caretakers for the lands and waters we are meeting on, we are grateful to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation for their teachings about the earth and our relations. Here at Fourth Space, we collaborate with our university community to activate research projects and initiatives that are in development across the university. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation, so we welcome comments and questions. For those online, please raise your hand or write your question in the chat. And for those in the space, please raise your hand and we will get a microphone to you. It is now my pleasure to hand it over to your presenters, Anne Whitelaw and Michael DeGrappa. Have a great conversation, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. I'm Anne Whitelaw. I'm the Provost and Vice President Academic, and it's kind of disconcerting to see myself speaking on screen, so I'm going to look over here. Evil.
And I'm Michael DeGrappa, Vice President, Services and Sustainability. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming this afternoon.
And we are the co-chairs of the Future Concordia Committee. And we're really pleased to be here today to speak to you about the findings of the working group and to talk a little bit about next steps. Michael?
Yeah, so thank you very much. This was really a process that was born out of the beginnings of the pandemic at a time when we were planning the return to campus. And we realized that there was a unique opportunity for us to look at what is it that we would be coming back to. And so we thought this was a great way to start asking ourselves some questions about what will Concordia of the future look like. And so from that, we took it and looked at it from a number of different perspectives.
Okay, so maybe we'll start with the first slide.
Yep.
Oh, I can do that. I'm usually much better organized.
This is the dry run, right? This is the dress rehearsal.
Exactly, exactly. Okay. And then we'll sort of launch into the, fully slick presentation.
Okay.
So maybe I'll start by talking about what prompted this meeting and this grouping of people to think about what Concordia would look like. And I think, as Michael said, a lot of it came out of the pandemic and the recognition that things were changing dramatically, and to start thinking about how we were going to come out of the pandemic, but then also realizing that that would be fairly limiting because there was always that, let's go back to what was normal. And I think what we really wanted to think of is not just what's going to happen in 2022, so right now, but what was going to happen, what would Concordia look like in 2030 or 2024 even and beyond. So that was really the mindset that we were working with in our activities. And what we really wanted to do is to take the time to think about what Concordia would look like in terms of how we taught, how we lived at Concordia, how we worked at the university, and to really think about the impact of those lived experiences on all the activities across the university. And to really, so what Future Concordia ended up doing was to reflect on our core mission as a university and how our imaginings of the future could have an impact on our practices as a university. So we're here to talk about the findings of the working groups. And when we first set up Future Concordia, we were thinking about 5 key areas that we really wanted to look at. So we wanted to look at our student experience. What are our students experiencing now, and what kind of student experience do we want to build for the future? What are the changes that are going to happen to our workforce and the workplace? I mean, that was a very immediate conversation discussion, but became something that we really realized we needed to think of mindfully, not in a reactive mode, but in a proactive mode. How do we use our existing spaces, and how can we imagine campus spaces in the future, and how they might respond differently to needs that we don't even imagine? And maybe Michael will probably talk about this when he looks at it, but it was interesting through all of the working groups, the question of space came up again and again and again. How do we do research? Research that has an impact and that changes our world. How do we think about our connections with local and global communities? And finally, or maybe I should say primarily, because given the massive changes to teaching and pedagogy, we brought in an already existing committee, which was the Advisory Committee on Teaching and Learning, that had already begun its work and brought it into the Future Concordia fold, I guess, because it was really important for this working group to think about how we teach, how our students learn, and how we can think about different ways of working with working with our students.
So we set up the 6 working groups, and you see the membership here, and just want to take the opportunity on behalf of Anne and myself to thank everyone who participated as a member of each of the groups. Their input was fantastic. It allowed us to learn. And we, in picking or in identifying people for these groups, we really went with individuals from across all areas of the university. They were not selected as representatives of a particular area. We did not do this along unit, departmental, or sectoral lines. We did it on the basis of individuals who had a certain expertise, individuals who we thought had a unique perspective and relevant experience, and who would really think about Concordia as a whole and what was in the best interests of the university long term. As I say, the objective was really to get a huge number of different perspectives on things, so to avoid groupthink, but really to challenge some of the ideas that were put forward. And we really encouraged the working groups to think boldly about the possible outcomes, and to envision a future that involves transformation of where we are now and really innovation. So really to let their minds go and to think about opportunities that maybe have not been present right now. Thank you, Anne. From October last year to June, the working groups met. They conducted extensive research by interviewing a number of people across the university. They looked into what were some of the trends that were emerging as a result of the pandemic. They looked to other institutions to see what some of them were doing. We surveyed students, staff, faculty. We held consultations with them, and as I said, researched what was happening elsewhere. We also had the benefit of working with Ernst & Young, who were doing some work for us specifically on the future of work, and Deloitte has been partners with us here over the Unity project for a number of years. Each one of these firms having also particular expertise to help us with some of these ideas. So the consultations that were held were on different themes and concepts, and I think really informed the recommendations that came out.
All right, so recommendations. In June 2022, the working groups presented the following recommendations to the steering committee. And I'll start with teaching and learning. So here you have what came out of the consultations, and was the development of a mission statement, which I think is a really powerful mission statement for teaching and learning across the university. So I'll just let you look at that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the background. The Advisory Committee for Teaching and Learning, which, as I said, predated the formation of Future Concordia and has been leading and continues to be leading a conversation and discussions around teaching and learning across the university, was led by Vice Provost Innovation and Teaching and Learning, Sandra Gabriel, with active and I will say enthusiastic participation of Associate Deans from all 4 faculties, the School of Graduate Studies, and students, as well as some support from the CTL, from Continuing Education, and from K1. The way that the Teaching and Learning Working Group approached its task was really from a partnership approach. ACTL, or the Advisory Committee on Teaching and Learning, was the convener But the associate deans or the plans, the plans were really built to fit with the culture and the pedagogical approaches of disciplines. So it wasn't really viewed as a one-size-fits-all. It was really working with faculties, working with departments to find the right approach to teaching and learning in the future that would work for those. The Teaching and Learning Committee hosted over 40 consultations with faculty members and students primarily to address and to explore the specific experiences within faculties, but then also to have consultations and discussions with particular groups. So there were some consultations with Indigenous faculty and Indigenous students, for example. Another one on racialized faculty and students. Students with disabilities. Just to get a sense of the breadth, not to imagine that our student body, our learners are all the same. There's tremendous differences, and we need to be able to understand those experiences to be able to respond appropriately. There was also the consultation. You see here the core values that came out. One was to support a holistic learning experience. That basically means it's not just what happens in the classroom, although that's obviously a key component, but it's also all of the other learning opportunities that happen outside the classroom, whether it's experiential learning, whether it's the student-driven learning, whether it's co-op experiences. There's a whole breadth of ways that students who come through the university learn and grow, and we really wanted to make sure that we understand that concept when we're moving forward in planning for teaching and learning. We also wanted to foster student belonging and inclusion. So that was one of the reasons to have the breadth of consultations, was so that when we're thinking about the student, we're thinking about the diversity of our students, and to really think about approaches that respond to that diversity. The consultations also revealed the following actions, or actions were taken following the consultations. One is to think about greater program and pedagogical innovation, so really start to push the envelope. How can we do things differently? What can we keep what's working well, but also what can we do that's different? Foster learning, well-being, and success. So again, that's part of thinking about the holistic experience or learner experience at the university, and really focusing in on the things that we can do, both as individual faculty members, but also the university as a whole. To value teaching appropriately, and this might be a little bit inside baseball, I think, in terms of the way that the university assesses faculty members, but we tend to, in our assessments of faculty, to focus on research. And teaching is the thing that you kind of do when you're not doing your research. And of course, that's not what our students think. Our students think that we should be teaching them. And so I think it comes back to us as an institution to start valuing teaching in the work of our faculty members and in our work as a university. To partner widely but effectively. So we do have partnerships within the university, with other universities, with not-for-profit and private industry partnerships through our experiential learning. Are we doing everything we can to maximize those? Are we picking the right partners? So really having a look at the partners that we're working with. And then finally, improving our institutional processes and supports. Nothing like a pandemic to realize that your CTL is tiny, and you need to have more things in place to be able to support our faculty members. Moving on to research and impact. Maybe I'll just say that we're going to have questions at the end. Did we say that? We're going to have questions at the end, so feel free to write them down. We do want to hear from you if I stop talking, or stop talking for so long. The future of research. So this is a really interesting group to really think about what is the future of research, and the experience for many of the researchers that the leaders, MJ and Mamoun, interviewed and talked to, is the pandemic had a huge impact on research. Everything from delayed access to labs, not being able to, if you did field research, not being able to go out into the field to do your basic research. For somebody like me who does archival research, not that I'm doing any now, but archives were closed. So your research program stalled for many faculty members. because of the pandemic. So it allows, again, a reflection on what are the kind of things that we need to do to better support researchers and to help them do their work in all sorts of circumstances. So I'll go through this relatively quickly. We're planning on putting the research, the working group reports online, so you can really drill into the immense amount of work that all of the groups did. But here I'll talk about, in sort of, you can see 7 of the major takeaways. But I would say if I summarize it, what the working group recommended is a greater understanding of the diversity of the research that our faculty members do, which we already know there's disciplinary richness there, but also understanding that there's, in terms of the outputs, there are regular kinds of, peer-reviewed publications, but there's also really important community research that gets done that isn't necessarily reflected in the way we assess our faculty members in terms of their research. How can we better understand time and how we can support faculty members to have more time to do their research, or simplify processes so that less time is devoted to administrative tasks and more time is devoted to research? How can we look at research leave for tenure track faculties, for example, which is currently not possible? What kind of changes to infrastructure can we be looking at? And here we're not really, the group was not really talking about buildings. It's not about having necessarily more buildings, but it's having buildings and spaces that are flexible, that are adaptive, that are more open and accessible to researchers. And then also the being able to connect to working with other faculties, other departments, other researchers, and figuring out a way for the research ecosystem to be able to support that work. Student experience. This was a very active and very enthusiastic group, and they did a lot of consultation with students and with others. And here I want to recognize the work of Alice and of Rebecca. So really the focus was on how Concordia can stay responsive and agile to student needs, to be able to foster a student experience that supports our diverse student body while they're on campus, and how while they're on campus we can prepare them for the time that they leave and they graduate. So a number of suggestions there around helping students navigate the university structure so that they know where to get the responses or the answers that they need to questions, creating new opportunities for socialization, for network. And here again, the question of space came in, about what kind of flexible student-centered spaces can we start thinking about at Concordia. Developing expertise and transferable skills that can be used outside of the classroom, personal and professional interests, and finally looking at securing employment for our students during the time that they're at the university and beyond. And if I can summarize all of that, I would say that one of the biggest recommendations of the working group on student experience was that Concordia needs to really prioritize creating a culture of wellness for our students. And that involves all of these other elements that I just talked about, but that really, we need to work more efficiently and perhaps differently at making sure that our students' experience at Concordia is the one that allows them to succeed and to thrive.
As I mentioned at the beginning, this project was really born of discussions that we had in the spring and summer of 2021 when we were looking at the return to campus for September of that year. And as we started asking ourselves the questions about work and the future of the workforce and workplace, we started asking about the future of the university. But this is what it started with. And so we were asking ourselves, how has the pandemic how has it or how will it influence the nature of the work at the university? How will it impact the workforce? Because there were demographic trends as well that were in play for some time before, and how will it affect the workplace? So the committee reflected on that, and there were some trends that we were starting to see emerge, not just at other universities, but in other industries, as everyone had to tackle not just the issue of the pandemic, but labor constraints, people moving away, people removing themselves from the workforce. So these were all trends that were having an impact. The group that looked at this adopted or opted for what they call a flexible hybrid work model, where there'll be a mix of in-person and remote work that would be dependent on every unit's own particular needs. And so really shying away from what I'll call a one-size-fits-all approach. So a number of the areas where they issued recommendations having to do with manager training probably requires different skill sets, and it's a different approach to manage employees when you see them every day, when everyone is in the same suite of offices, as opposed to when people are working remotely. So one of the recommendations has to do with creating specific training for managers and employees on managing performance in that different situation. Technology obviously is a big piece of this. How do we leverage technology and infrastructure to provide flexible workspaces? So you can think of Zoom and video and audio capabilities in every conference room that can support people being both on campus and working remotely. To create flexible workspaces, such as concepts of hoteling, collaborative spaces, so that people come together in a space such as this, where you have some flexibility for moving furniture around, and working for a particular period of time, and then people go back to their office workstation, etc. Shared offices. The notion that if people aren't here 5 days a week, then how does that affect the concept of one person, one office, or one person, one workspace? So developing ways to share spaces over time. Professional development, I think, is also a very important part of this discussion, because this, I think, the recognition that professional development is very important, and not just for a person to gain additional skills for the job that they're performing at any given time, but really, if we look at the career path development of an individual, how do we provide opportunities for people to move within the organization, to take on additional responsibilities, and to develop other management and leadership skills? Equity. This is one of the themes that keeps coming back in terms of how do we make sure that there is some measure of equity in the different situations across the university. Really has to be customized or adapted to particular situations. As I said earlier, it's not a one-size-fit-all that can work. And we want to make sure that people aren't negatively affected. The thought that came up a lot was, how are those who are on campus maybe, taking on additional work for those who are not on campus. There's also the situation where I can tell you that since March 2020, there have been employees that have been here every day, because of the nature of their work. I think of people in security, I think of people in the trades and IITS working in the laboratories. They don't have that ability. So what does equity in terms of hybrid work or remote work mean in that particular context? Hiring practices. Or hiring process, and that's even before we started talking about labor shortages or some of the difficulties that we're hiring. In one area that I know of, we've posted jobs 8 or 9 times, and we just don't have either the suitable candidates or with what's happening, supply and demand, we're just not able to pay people to be able to attract them. So we realize that we have to streamline and simplify some of our hiring processes and be flexible to be able to respond not just to the market, but also to the changing needs of individual departments. Performance. Again, we have to relook at how we do performance discussions because it has to really be a structured two-way dialogue, and it's not something that should happen once a year. It's something that should be continuous. It's something that should, happen throughout the year, but also has to probably take on a different form if we are dealing with employees who are either present or working remotely. Time management was one of the last issues raised as well. The issue here was people looking for some automated tools to help us to disconnect. I think those of you who remember particularly the early days of the pandemic, the feeling that we were working harder, longer, and that's true because when you're working in a Zoom environment, it's so easy to go from one meeting to the next. There are no breaks, the natural breaks that happen, just as, for example, Ann and I walked over here. That gave us our only 15-minute break of the day. But others of you, everyone I know has the same issue. So I think the virtual environment creates its own pressure. So how can we find ways? What are some of the I don't want to say rules, but maybe guidelines that we can share to help people manage time better? Limiting duration of certain meetings, having some breaks, and having some time dedicated to team building. That's one of the issues if people are working remotely and some people are working on campus. How do you maintain a team cohesion? How do you maintain the culture of the organization if people aren't always in the same room? So there are ways to do that. That's okay. Space, the final frontier. As Anne said, this is the one theme that sort of cut across all of the working groups. And so everyone identified space as an important part of what will define their success or the realization of their vision. What the working group suggested is that space be designed for flexibility and for ways for it to adapt over time to the changing needs of the members of our community. Specifically, what does this mean? So in terms of accessibility, there's also the physical accessibility, which I know we have a lot to do in terms of mobility on campus. But in this particular case, we're talking about having a centralized, maybe unified space inventory, space booking system that gives people access to rooms across the two campuses so they know what's available and that can be booked. Technology I alluded to earlier in terms of ensuring that classrooms and conference rooms are equipped with a certain standard of technology, be it Zoom, be it video or projection or Wi-Fi, so that multiple types of activities can happen in those rooms. Collaboration, so the need for flexible collaborative spaces for staff, faculty, and students. Conference rooms should be available for booking for all rooms, for all groups rather. There should be flexible furniture in there. Technology, which as best as possible should be plug and play so that we don't need an IT technician. Or I don't have to call Sohaila in to fix things to get the presentations up. Something that is easy enough to use for people, and modular spaces as well. So rooms where you have furniture that you can move, put together, break apart, that for those kind of community building exercises. And again, the need to have these spaces evolve over time to meet the needs, to meet the need for people to collaborate, to study, to rest, to create at all times. Optimization of space. And I know this is an issue near and dear to your heart when it comes to things like class schedule and start and end times. I suspect that there are some categories of space where I think we have more than we necessarily need, but for whatever historical reasons, we have not looked at them, analytically and said, if we were to make certain changes in the way that we use the space, if we optimize the use of space, we could transform some spaces for other purposes. So I think to look at, to analyze how space is used, how space is used, but also developing policies for some of these spaces, I think would allow us to find opportunities. The continuous review, to continue to look, the suggestion here was to create a campus space steering committee with representation from students, faculty, staff, to have those discussions so that we can identify what those emerging needs are. And connection, the last point, refers to designing spaces that we can use to help deepen the sense of community and belonging across the university for everyone. So I think those were all important issues that were identified. The last working group has to do with university outreach. And the group looked at it and came up with the metaphor of a revolving door, and saying that we have to continuously be mindful of the points of contact that we have with the community outside of Concordia and they have with us, and recognizing that all of those points of contact are equally important. That being said, the committee recognized that outreach is very broad and multifaceted. It's very complex with a wide breadth, and the feeling was that they didn't have enough time to fully explore this particular issue. So they've asked for additional time to hold some 2 or 3 sessions. They can do a SWOT analysis, so look at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats with each of the activities that we are doing right now. So additional consultations I just mentioned. I think the ability also to communicate and ask community groups, municipality, government, industry, academia, what it is that they would like to see. We want to map out all of the players and initiate certain activities to identify common grounds between the different stakeholders. We want to facilitate co-creation and develop a mission that talks of what does community university outreach mean at Concordia. Develop that vision. I mean, some of these points are based on the similar theme. Develop a framework. So setting up a board committee to continuously deal with and oversee Concordia's future and reevaluate processes and our values and strategies so that we have a high level of outreach towards the community. I said board committee, it's board or committee, because a board committee would be a totally different thing, and I just saw Freddie Jacobs probably have a heart attack there. So, and strategy development, to align our activities with ongoing initiatives at the university, recognizing that there are a lot of other terrific activities that are going on, and working with the Office of Community Engagement, the Anti-Black Racism Initiative, the Innovators Club, the Indigenous Directions, and Concordia's campus as a living lab. That's the Intra-University Accelerator. So I think the idea was they want a little bit more time. They want to reach out to the stakeholders and really develop a vision and mission statement for what university outreach means at Concordia.
So, next steps. So, what do we do with all these amazing recommendations. Not put them on a shelf. So maybe that's point one. So communicate the results. First step, of course, is this gathering. So thank you all for coming, and I'm looking forward to your questions and follow-up. The working groups really are rich documents. There's a lot of really great suggestions and thoughts of what Concordia can do in the future. So we're going to put those on the Future Concordia website so that you can take a look at what's being proposed and give us your thoughts on what you're seeing there. The next step, of course, is then reviewing the final recommendations. We've obviously read through them. We're presenting them here, but then we have to think about how to act on those. So we're looking at the recommendations in collaboration with the units that are most directly affected by them. So I'll take student experience, for example. We're already having conversations with the student services groups and others to be able to say, okay, so what do you think? What are the things that you're already doing? And I'm really happy to say that a number of the recommendations in all of the working groups are things that are already being done or being talked about at Concordia. So maybe one of the things that really important takeaways from this process is to see that people who aren't developing things are coming up with recommendations that align with some of the things that we're already doing. So that's very heartening to see. So then going back to work with the units who would be responsible for the delivery of some of these recommendations, working with them, prioritizing the recommendations to see what can be delivered immediately, what will take a little bit longer to do, recognizing that, of course, we can't do everything all at once, and especially to really take the time necessary to look at the recommendations, because these are the recommendations that are going to inform Concordia on how it moves forward in the future. So we need to look at those and as Michael says, align them with some of the other priority areas that we're looking at around sustainability, around anti-Black racism, around Indigenous directions, because these things can't happen in silos. And then one of the ways that another important thing is to align the recommendations with the vision and the mission and the priorities of the university. So last week, meetings were held over 2 afternoons with senior academic and other leadership at Concordia to look at to think about how we can move forward and what our vision for Concordia in the very long term might look like. So much of our discussions were informed by the recommendations of Future Concordia, but also of other documents.
We also have ongoing right now a Future of Work pilot program. So some of the learnings that came out of the past year, we had intended to run the pilot until May of 2022, but because of the curfew that was reimposed last fall and some other delays, we decided to extend the pilot for 1 more year, and which allows us to really test some of these learnings in certain departments. Linda Campione is grateful to have as the project director, who is looking at this, working with a number of units across the university. And so we're hoping that that's going to lead to some policies and practices and some guidelines for people. So we're hoping that after the end of the pilot, we'll be able to have something more conclusive and definitive to share with the community on the future of work at Concordia. The Teaching and Learning Strategic Plan and is also a project that's ongoing with Sandra. Maybe you want to.
I wasn't prepared for that.
Oh, sorry. I just assumed. Sorry.
So yeah, the Teaching and Learning Strategic Plan is coming out of as I said, those consultations are ongoing. We're in the validation stage right now, will be, you kind of had a sense of what the 5 action areas are. It's really populating those 5 action areas with the faculties to figure out how to move forward.
We'll do better in the actual presentation.
Yes, we will. Sorry, I have an alarm that I don't know how to turn off. So I guess maybe we'll end by thanking everyone for coming.
Thank
Since everyone's here, I really want to thank Linda Campione for, herding the cats, steering the ship, whatever metaphor you want to use, but for making sure that we're actually sitting here in front of you talking about these recommendations. And also Céline Fortin, who was a very active member of the committee to move these things forward, and Rima Said for their outstanding organizational support. Michael, I think you already thanked the group members,
yep.
But I really don't think we can thank them often enough for some really great ideas and for the dedication and time put into doing this work. So.
And what's been fabulous is that they keep asking us to stay involved. They want to know how the process is going. So that I think speaks to the commitment and hopefully the positive experience that they had in working with their colleagues on this. And it's all, as I said, to the benefit of the future of Concordia. So thank you all very much.
So we're open for question and answer period. There is one question on the chat. So you have an option, as mentioned in the beginning. You can either raise your hand and you can speak directly. I believe that we will be able to hear you. But I'm just going to run down a couple of questions that came up while you were presenting before we go to the raised hands, if that's okay. So one question may have asked while you were answering it, and it was, how were working group members selected?
So we had a steering committee that consisted of Anne and myself as co-chairs, and I'm going to probably forget a number of people, but Nadia Hardy, Lena Wilshire, William Chibe, Philip Beauregard, Laura Mitchell,
and
Paula Wood-Adams. And so these were discussions that we had, and I can tell you it was not done in 15 minutes. We had discussions, I think, for several. I think the important thing, as I said, is to make sure that we had individuals who had a certain expertise and experience that we thought, was relevant to this sort of blue sky thinking, people who had a mix of recent additions to the university and people who've been here a long time. There wasn't a formula, but we really sort of brainstormed and over time, and then we approached people, and some people said yes, and I would say most people said yes. Most people said yes, they were excited to be part of that. So that was the process.
Yeah, and faculty and staff.
And faculty and staff,
Yep,
sure.
yep.
So I see a hand raised, but I'm just going to go to two more questions that were here before. One might be more of a comment. So it says, what about the aggregation of collective intelligence and the enhancement of the community, emergence of communautics? Do we have a policy to deepen our relationship to the cyberspace, metaverse use, etc.? So it might have been in addition to the comments you were saying. And why don't we attract the community scientific production applied sciences and work with them? So I think it's comments in addition to what was made. What is the best process to connect our projects that are aligned with recommendations? Not sure if you have a...
What is the best, sorry?
It says, what is the best process to connect our projects that are aligned with recommendations?
That's a really great question, and I think that's that's one of those mother questions, if I can use that term. It's a question that comes up a lot, that you launch something and you think that you're doing something that's not been done at the university, and then you find out that there's somebody over there who's already doing it. So I think that's a larger institutional question of how do we make people more aware of work that's happening. I think part of the advantage of having a future Concordia working group, and I think the next stage is figuring out what the structure will be to around the recommendations, is that might be a place for individuals to, if you're working on something that aligns with one of the recommendations, to upload it or to connect with someone and have that information made available.
Yeah. I think totally agree. I don't think that what we're suggesting is that this is the end of the fact gathering process or lessons learned. I know Linda's reached out to groups who have been working remotely or did in the first year, and asking them for what are the lessons learned, what are the things that you would like to share with us, how could things have been done better, what could we as an institution have done. So these are things we're continually looking for. So if you do have ideas aligned with any of the projects or things that you think we may have missed, please bring them forward.
Thank you. Our next question is from our audience member online, Aaron Johnson. I believe you could just ask the question and we will hear you if you...
Yes, so I have can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yep.
it's perfect.
Okay, just testing. I have a question about the space and infrastructure. So, a number of new buildings have been put up. So, for example, the Science Hub, and there's ongoing renovation projects in, for example, the Hall building. But there are also a number of other infrastructure issues at Concordia, both in the teaching and on the research side. So on the teaching side, it's still a case that many of the classrooms are not equipped with, say, for example, lecture capture, which is becoming frequently used by faculty members. On the research side, infrastructure is also starting to age with no sort of mechanism. Has that been discussed at all through any of the groups? And is there a plan to sort of address these going forward?
Well, I think there was a plan, or there is a plan to continuously upgrade, particularly the technology in some of our in our classrooms and conference rooms. I know we've made some major investments over the past couple of years. There are plans to renovate spaces based on their condition and any deferred maintenance, etc. So I think these two, if I can put it this way, these two issues are proceeding in parallel. I think we need classrooms. We know we need classrooms with technology. We know that there's old technology that we need to upgrade. There are some classrooms that have never had the technology. There are rooms that we need to change the furniture or need to address something else. So I think that continues, and we have a long-term plan to address. The other issue when we talk about the future is really to try to predict what some of those new trends might be. So one is sort of, I don't want to say status quo, but it's to, every day we continue to work as we were working on these spaces, but trying to also identify what some of those future needs are. So I don't think that we're going to stop doing any of those upgrades as a result of this. We just have to find a way to coordinate things, over the long term.
And maybe if I can add, Michael, that one of the really interesting things about the way the working groups work together is that they talk to one another. So the teams that were working on space, for example, would talk to the research group, would talk to the teaching and learning group to be able to say, okay, so what's coming out from, what are you hearing that we need to know to talk about space? So that collaboration and the interconnection of the recommendations was a really important part of Future Concordia. And I think that's how we're thinking, not just about, okay, how do we deal with things now, but how do we project into the future some of the differences in space needs.
There was a sort of a second part question, and it's to do with service. So obviously the focus has been on teaching and research, but service is also important, for frontline services from our staff members, services from faculty members. Has there been discussion about, especially amongst minority groups, who are being asked to be on different committees where we're often taxing our faculty members who do represent minority groups? Has there been discussion about this balance between research, teaching, and service?
Yes. Yes, lots of it. That was part of the findings of the Research and Impact Group, and it aligned very well with some of the other committees that were being formed around the impact of COVID on, or the impact of the pandemic on research productivity of women and racialized researchers. And it's also part of larger work that's happening around assessment. How do we assess, I'll say research productivity in quotes, but it's really, there are different kinds of research where most universities are set up to evaluate one kind of research, knowing the diversity of research outputs and impact, how do we start thinking about that differently, and how do we respond to the different needs of our faculty members? And that includes assessing for racialized faculty members and for women faculty members the greater expectation of service on certain kinds of committees.
Thank you. The next question is, typically when there's an abundance of jobs, let's go to university. Has there been any discussion or thought on students not returning or attending university because of the job market? Solutions, incentives to return?
So I would say not as part of Future Concordia, although I could be wrong. No, I am wrong. I think that was part of a conversation, some conversations that happened in the student experience group. I'm looking at Rebecca. So somewhat. It's also something that we're aware of, and we're thinking about how can we recognize when students leave the university, often to go for jobs in the area that they're studying in. How, when they come back, can we recognize the learning that they've obtained when they're in the job market or in the workforce? So that's a process that we really need to think through, but it's one that we're actively considering.
The only thing I'll add, and I'm absolutely not qualified or an expert in this, but the only thing I'll say is, if you look at the economy, what could be one, situation in the economy one day can quickly change a couple of months later. So I suspect that we will still be encountering labor shortages in the future, but we're starting to see signs that could be reversed as companies start laying off people because of. So one has to, I think, you can't react to everything, the shifts that happen all the time. I think it's to keep an eye on the big picture and the long term.
We have one comment and one question. So the comment is, happy to hear that faculty are using lecture capture. And another individual has a question. When leaders will be deciding the future of their workplace based on the unit's needs, my hope is that the decision will be research informed and transparent to minimize decisions based in potential bias. Is there a strategy that might be put in place to promote sound decision making?
A strategy? I think this is the one issue, again, going back to the question of equity, that we have faced. And even when we consult with other, not just sister universities, but also other organizations, where there are companies that have taken an approach, and I say companies that have taken an approach where a CEO or president will say, this is the rule for the entire company. Whereas I think we have tried to really leave it to the individual needs, requirements, and discussion, hopefully, within the groups to decide, how can we best serve the community, the members of the community that we serve? What are our own needs? What are the cycles in a particular unit? It's going to come down to those individual discussions. How do we? People are asking us to audit to make sure that there will probably be inconsistencies, as there have been. If two people occupying a similar position in two different units look and say, how come one set of rules there, how come? Could be that it's a different, the demands on the particular unit. It could be that the staffing situation is different there. So I don't have an answer. All I'm saying is this is the question that I think keeps coming back all the time. How do we ensure equity across the institution, understanding that, I'll say it for a third time, it's not one size fits all.
And that's also the role of the pilot programs, is to really get a sense of how those decisions are made and how those decisions are governed.
Yeah.
There's no other questions right now. Oh, one just popped up. During the return to campus pilot project I'm reading this for the first time. During the return to campus pilot project, the facilities management, the LibCal online booking platform was tested, along with a few other departments. Do we have stats on the merits of this platform towards the concept of space sharing or hoteling?
Well, part of the pilot is us for also to test some of the tools. And I think that in this next phase of pilot programs, we're going to be looking at, hoteling creating shared areas where there are shared workstations, and booking those. And there have been questions that have been asked about the tool itself, and we're going to look at that. I think what we don't want to see is a proliferation of tools, in a faculty or department, et cetera. I think we want to, the particular tool I think is used in the library, in John Molson School of Business, and so we're trying to use that. If there are, for whatever reasons, the need to look at other products, or we decide on, the idea I think is still to have one across the institution, because it makes it easier to go back to the notion of a centralized booking, because right now we have probably 6 or 7 different platforms that manage space. And so when we have to try to find conference rooms or classrooms, say when there were floods in the Faubourg basement, we don't have access to some of that information because it's on different platforms. So we want to try to find one. And so I would say that this is one of the objectives of the pilot period is to look at the tools as well.
Another question is, concerning workspaces, there was a big push before the pandemic to have open concept offices, but with very tight working space between co-workers, which made it difficult to work efficiently and which was a disaster during COVID. Has there been a change as to how we look at the open concept spaces?
I think every group has looked, every organization that I'm aware of that have had projects, moving towards knocking down walls to create these shared spaces. I think the science has also changed, and I don't know what I'm here, I'm not qualified for much, but I think there's a lot of science that has evolved about how the notion of contact, that we spent a lot of time cleaning surfaces at the beginning of the pandemic, thinking that was how the virus was transmitted. And so that's when we have the physical distancing, that's when we had the plexiglass to create separations. I don't know where the science is on that today. What I can say is no, we have not come to a definitive conclusion on, are we for or against those open work surfaces. What I can tell you is that a lot of groups that I see outside are going back to those. Now, maybe more space, further distance, higher walls, things like that, but certainly we are seeing the use of open spaces again.
Thank you. There's no other questions?
From the audience?
Anyone? We have time.
Wait. Well,
I wanted to avoid this.
you can't.
No, I just wanted, you both thanked everybody on the committees and the working groups, but I also wanted to say thanks to the two of you, because when we started this way back, one of the questions somebody made was, are we going to do this and it's going to sit on a shelf collecting dust? And I've been here over 20 years, and this is the fastest we moved from one part to the next. And it's actually quite endearing that there's activities. And I don't know what the future is going to look like, but the fact that we are taking these recommendations and moving to a stage of, let's say, action planning, I think that's great. And I wanted to say thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions like that?
It looks like that's it. So thank you very much.
Okay.
To be continued. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for joining us in person and online at Fourth Space for Shaping Concordia's Future. Just a reminder that this has been live streamed and recorded and will be available on YouTube immediately after this. We're going to go ahead and close up the Zoom shortly, so thank you again